In this talk, I will present our paper titled Task-Driven Wavelets Using Constrained Empirical Risk Minimization. There are two important topics in the title, task-driven wavelets and constrained empirical risk minimization. Our initial motivation for studying these two topics was to design neural networks whose output corresponds to continuous as opposed to discrete objects. As an example, you may think of a network taking a discrete image as input and produces a contour or a vector field as output. We've chosen to use wavelets and multi-resolution analysis to efficiently represent such objects. This motivated us to learn wavelet bases directly from data instead of choosing handcrafted ones. In turn, this led us to the problem of training a neural network with constraints on its parameters. And that is what the second topic in our title is about, how to train neural networks with constraints on parameters using Riemannian Gradient Descent. To explain our work in more detail, we briefly recall what a wavelet and a multi-resolution decomposition is. Wavelet analysis starts by choosing a so-called scaling function, also referred to as the father wavelet, which we will simply call the wavelet. We dilate the scaling function with a specific dilation rate and take integer shifts of this map, as depicted on the right. We require that these shifts are mutually orthogonal so that the shifts of the scaling map form an orthogonal basis. In the lower left figure, we have depicted the subspace spanned by such a basis at a specific dilation level J. Wavelet analysis is about projecting a given signal onto these subspaces at various resolution levels, thereby obtaining a multi-resolution decomposition of the signal. In the previous slide, we explained how to obtain a multi-resolution decomposition using the so-called Haar wavelet. There are many other scaling maps, however, with which this analysis can be performed. The crucial requirement is that the shifts of these mappings are mutually orthogonal, which can be encoded in a system of equations. This motivates the question of whether we can learn a scaling map instead of manually choosing one. The specific example that motivated us was to design a convolutional network predicting multi-resolution decompositions of contours and medical images. The encoder of this network is a standard two-dimensional convolutional encoder with no constraints on the filters. The decoder, however, is essentially a one-dimensional convolutional network where we constrain the filters to be wavelets. Altogether, we now arrive at a constrained optimization problem. The constraints on the decoder are that the filters correspond to wavelets. These constraints can be encoded in a system of equations commonly referred to as the quadratic mirror filter conditions. Our goal is to minimize an objective measuring differences between contours while satisfying these constraints. We found it more insightful to solve our problem in a more general context. Namely, we have a neural net with parameters alpha and theta. We have constraints on theta in the form of a finite set of equations encoded by map f. We require that the parameters theta are constrained to the zero set of f, which generically is a nice geometric space. To be more precise, if 0 is a regular value of f, meaning that its derivative is surjective on the zero set, then a set of admissible parameters theta form a smooth Riemannian manifold denoted by M here. We exploit the geometric structure of the manifold to decompose the gradient needed for optimization into a part of the constraint manifold and the unconstrained space. To perform stochastic gradient descent, we follow geodesics approximately in a special coordinate system on M, a so-called graph coordinate system. Essentially, we write a small patch on the manifold as the graph of another smooth map denoted by zeta here. We are guaranteed that such coordinates exist by the implicit function theorem. We then follow descent directions in this coordinate system by approximating geodesics in the direction of the negative gradient. In this slide, we show some sample results for our auto-contouring example. We predict the boundary of the spleen in CT scans obtained from a medical dataset. Below, we have depicted the task-optimized wavelets found for the first component of the contour. We found that wavelets with larger support perform best in this specific example. Here we show another example where we predict the boundary of the prostate central gland in MRI images, also obtained from a medical dataset. Here we found that simpler wavelets with smaller support performed best. We have compared our results with a baseline 2D NNU net, showcasing the robustness of our models. The main reason for why we outperform the baseline in terms of robustness is that it struggles with predicting small structures, often only correctly identifying a small number of pixels. In conclusion, we presented a general method for imposing constraints on parameters of neural networks. Furthermore, we demonstrated its effectiveness by learning wavelet bases from data.